I want to talk in this video about something that happened this morning that I thought was interesting and illustrative. I was watching reruns of Blue Blood when I saw a headline flash by on my iPhone, and this is the story that's up there now. Let's see if I can get it where you can see that. Maybe you can't. I don't know. There, I think that's better. 5 Russians suspected of preparing an attack arrested in Bezier. And that flashed by as I was watching. I saw, the corner of my eye, and I looked at it. I said, "My God, Vladimir Putin losing his grip." I mean, I know things are bad in Russia. Oil prices are dropping. They have, currency drain. Economy's in bad shape. Stock market's in bad shape. They're under all these pressures from the United States and Western Europe, sanctions. They got crap going on in Ukraine. NATO is sort of getting ready to stand up to them a little bit more. And, so what? Vlad's sending terror squads into France to attack the French? That was my first thought. I said, man, this guy's crazy. So when I got a chance, I pulled up the story and I read it, and it's like, oh, 5 Russians, 5 Chechens who were arrested. And of course, the Chechens are Muslims. And I said, well, now this is an entirely different story here, because given what had just happened last week, with in Paris, Charlie Hebdo, and all the rest, we say, oh, geez, this makes sense. This is more terror against the French. This is what they're geared up for, and pulling out the soldiers and doing all this stuff. This fits the narrative. But that's not the way the media wants to work. Now, in this case, it's Le Monde, but the American media is the same way. They don't want to say that. So they give us this headline that's entirely deceptive. And I can give you an example from the world media and the American media. You may recall last week some young Ohio guy got picked up and arrested. The FBI claims he was planning a terror attack against the Congress. Well, if you read the reports, he's referred to usually as Christopher Cornell. In fact, in some of the articles, for example, the Al Jazeera report, he was just referred to as Christopher Cornell. It never mentions in the story that he's a convert to Islam. It never mentions in the story that the name he goes by now is Rahil Marous Ubaidah. And the American stories are all the same way. It's Christopher Cornell, Christopher Cornell, Christopher Cornell. Some of them, when you dig deep, you find out that he's a convert and that he changed his name. And so, but the question is that how the media usually deals with people Americans who change their name, become Muslims? No. I mean, last week, Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali was in the news. We don't refer to him as Cassius Clay anymore. We refer to him as Muhammad Ali. He converted to Islam and he changed his name, and that's the name he wants to go by. So we refer to him as Muhammad Ali, and the news reports didn't say Cassius Clay is in the hospital. They said Muhammad Ali is in the hospital. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was in the news last week for a couple of things he said. And they refer to him as what? Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I didn't see anybody refer to him as Lou Alcindor. I remember I'm old enough to remember when he was Lou Alcindor, but now he's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. If I met the man, I wouldn't say, hello, Mr. Alcindor, any more than I did meet Muhammad Ali a couple of times when I worked in Philadelphia, and I never referred to him, if I referred to him as something other than Muhammad Ali, it was Champ, not Cassius Clay. Probably would have, said something nasty to me maybe. But the point is we don't do that, and the media doesn't do that. But when somebody converts to Islam and becomes or attempts to become a terrorist, then we won't use his name, and we'll hide this from the American people. So, like the Al Jazeera report, you would never even know the guy had even converted. He's just some American named Christopher Cornell was planning to blow up. He could have been a member of the Tea Party, he could have been the KKK, he could have been some right-wing fanatic. And that's the problem. I'm not a professional journalist, but I did take journalism 101 back in college in the early 70s, and I remember what you're supposed to do in your stories is, who, what, where, when, and why. And, if yesterday was Martin Luther King Day, let's just say that 5 people from Pennsylvania of Irish descent who were members of the Ku Klux Klan were planning to blow up a church with black people in it to, note something on Martin Luther King Day because they're racists. Now, how would you report that? How would you, if you were a reporter, what would you put in the headline? 5 Pennsylvanians plan to blow up black church? 5 Irish Americans plan to blow up black church? Or 5 Klan members plan to blow up the black church? Because the who and the why are related. And if you're supposed to tell people who, what, where, when, and why, then giving them the information about the who, that they're Klan members, helps explain the why. Because it's not as if, Pennsylvanians routinely go out and attack African Americans. People in the Klan often do. I mean, there's a history of the Klan attacking African American churches and lynchings and terrorism and all kinds of other things. So the fact that they were members of the Klan gives you a clue. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that all Klan members blow up black churches. I'm sure there are plenty of Klan members who never did anything other than wear, robes and try to look silly. But some do. And the fact that they're members of that organization helps explain not just the who, not just the what, but also the why. And that's what good reporting is. But that's not what we see anymore in this country. And there's a problem, I believe, because it's going to come back to haunt the American media and to haunt a lot of other people. In 1933, Franklin Roosevelt became president. And part of his policy as president was to improve relations with Soviet Russia. Now, that was a wise policy, because we ended up, when we got to the 1940s, we needed each other. It would have been very difficult, if not impossible. Well, we probably could have won World War II without Russia, but only with the use of nuclear weapons and leveling Germany. We needed Soviet Russia's help. They certainly needed ours. So Roosevelt's policy was wise, and I don't mean to imply in any way that it wasn't. The problem was to get there and to get the American people on board, he lied about the nature of the realities of Soviet Russia. And the media lied with him, especially the New York Times. For example, the best example is the Ukrainian famine. I mean, 10, 11 million people, Ukrainians, were starved to death by Stalin. The Americans denied that it was going on. The New York Times denied that it was going on, even though their reporter, Durrani, who was in Russia at the time, knew what was happening. But he knew if he reported it, it would undercut Roosevelt's policy, so he kept his mouth shut. And we went along till 1945, Roosevelt's dead. Suddenly, the realities of Soviet Russia hit home, and the American people are scratching their heads. My God, how did this happen? Who lied to us about the nature of Stalin? Who told us Stalin was like, a cuddly guy who actually, Davies, who wrote the book Mission to Moscow, compared him to Jesus Christ? Watch the old movie, Mission to Moscow. You'd want to vomit. It's total propaganda and crap. And when it hit home, there was a reaction. This is what we've known as the Red Scare, because people were right to be outraged. And of course, there are always politicians who will take advantage of that. So you have the Red Scares and McCarthy and all the other terrible things that happened. And it's bad that they happened. And many of the politicians who were doing those things were taking advantage of it and abusing and acting like demagogues. But the reality is, nevertheless, it really did happen. People had been lied to for over a decade by the U.S. government and by the American media, who lied to them about the nature of what was going on in Soviet Russia. And we're seeing the same thing today, whereas the Obama administration, the Bush administration, don't want to admit what we're up against. Nobody wants to call it global jihadism or extreme Islam. Bush called it the global war on terror, which was fine, because anybody can be a terrorist. You call it global war against jihadism, you're only dealing with Muslims. Obama wouldn't even call it that. Wouldn't even call them terrorists. That's too dangerous. So we went to overseas contingency operations. You worked for the DOD, you couldn't use the word global war on terror. And now they're starting to use it, but they don't even like it anyway to get it associated with Islam. But, it's not the problem. I don't worry about Basque terrorists when I go to bed at night, or if I get on a plane. I don't worry about Red Brigade terrorists from Italy blow me up when I fly. I do worry that there might be some Muslims on the plane who are going to do something and try to, kill us all. That's the reality. And the problem is, sooner or later, that's going to hit home with something. Lincoln said you can fool some of the people all the time and all the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And sooner or later, something is going to happen in this country. I don't know, next week, next month, next year, 10 years, 20 years down the road. Something big is going to happen. And you're going to have thousands or tens of thousands or, God forbid, hundreds of thousands of dead Americans on your hand. And people are going to want to know who did it and why weren't they warned about it? Why were they told it has nothing to do with Islam? This has nothing to do with the Islamic world. These are just people who've distorted their religion, yada, yada, yada. And there will be a reaction. We had a red scare, we'll have a green scare. And it's going to be worse because of things like the internet. Because everything anybody ever said, ever wrote, any news report they were on, is all up here for people to look at. And people are going to be dragging out politicians' statements and positions and interviews on Meet the Press and say, oh my God, look at what the guy said. Look what just happened. What was going on? And they're not going to say, oh, these people were trying to prevent something from blowing up bigger because they didn't want a broader war against Islam and not just a war against radical Islam. No, they're going to think they were lied to. They're going to think that somebody was fooling them. They're going to think maybe Muslims infiltrated the government. Maybe Barack Obama is a secret Muslim. Maybe the Muslim Brotherhood has infiltrated into the State Department or something. They're going to come up with all these wifty ideas, none of which are true, but that's what will be thrown out there. And there will be people who will take political advantage of it, and God knows what's going to happen. Because you don't know what's going to happen, because you don't know how people will respond if something big happens. And something big sooner or later will happen. It's just a question of time. It's just a question of when. It's just not a question of if. Because they're going to try. So this is what we need to do. This is why we need to be more forthright now. Not just because we're being dishonest, but because we're not really fooling anybody. Who's fooled by all this? You think Muslims don't know what's going on in the Islamic world? I mean, you can say what you want about, your theory of Islam, and I talked about whether Islam is peaceful or not. But look at the Islamic world. Look at, everything from Morocco to the Philippines and everything in between. Do you see peace? Do you see peace in Algeria, where hundreds of thousands have died? Do you see peace in Libya, where the country's falling apart? Do you see peace in Egypt? Do you see peace in Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea, Chad, Nigeria, Niger, where several dozen churches have just been torched over the Charlie Hebdo stuff? Yemen, the area around Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan. I mean, it's all over. They know what's going on. They know in their own religion that they've got a problem, whether they are willing to admit it or not. And we know what's going on. Our government knows what's going on. They're not that stupid. But they won't come out and say it. And the media won't report it. So they tell us that 5 Russians were arrested for planning a terror attack. I mean, who do they think they're fooling? The only people they're fooling are people who are too stupid to read the story and just look at the headline. And you could argue, well, there's a lot of them. But the problem is, when those people are woken up, when the big one hits and they start reading the story, and then they're going to go back and look and say, well, who gave us that stupid headline? And then there's going to be hell to pay. And the way to avoid that now is to be honest. Just as Roosevelt had been honest in the 30s and 40s, he still probably could have gotten to the point where we had a better relationship with the Soviet Union so that we could win World War II. But you wouldn't have had what came afterwards. And that's my biggest fear. It's not just what we're doing to ourselves now. It's what's going to happen when things blow up. What happened when things blew up in World War II at Pearl Harbor? What did they end up doing? If you look at the things we did things we said we would never do. We had complained about unrestricted submarine warfare as practiced by the Germans from 1915 to 1941. We tried to get it outlawed. We equated it with using chemical weapons in warfare. And a couple hours after Pearl Harbor, what did we do?